Shirley Thompson is an award-winning composer, musical performer and cultural activist with an impressive track record. Among her many accomplishments, she's the first woman in Europe to have composed and conducted a symphony for the last 40 years. Well, let's start by hearing some of the score that she composed for a documentary of Jamaican immigrants to Britain, just like her own parents. What a beautiful way to start this interview. Lovely. Shirley,
so much.
Great to meet you.
Thank you.
How much of your own cultural heritage influences your work, would you say?
I'd say substantially, because I think it informs a lot of what I do, because it's my actual living experience, and I think it's important as an artist to express yourself through your culture.
And you've done a lot to address the terrible history of slavery through your music as well, haven't you? Tell me about that.
Right. Yes, I was invited in 2007 to commemorate the act of the abolition of the trade in enslaved African people. And I was really inspired to create pieces of artwork that would work as a legacy to represent what happened in those days from the 1400s, 1500s in Europe and in Africa through to the present day, in fact.
That's obviously quite a political statement. Do you think that modern music incorporates enough sort of history and politics into composition?
Well, that's a really interesting question. Because I don't think art music tends to deal with political, social issues. Certainly in contemporary avant-garde music, it tends to be much more abstract than that. So, yeah, I would say that I've used my cultural expression through music.
Now, you've obviously had an incredibly varied career. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment, but first let's just hear another clip of something that you composed for a TV drama.
Oh.
Beautiful again. So tell us a bit about that piece. What is it?
Well, I actually composed that piece for the Queen. It was the Queen's 50th anniversary. It's her Golden Jubilee, and I was invited to write a big piece that would be performed to her. And that's the beginning of the piece. It tells the story of London from 1066. And that's actually reflecting the countryside of London.
Exactly, because I was going to say that sort of sounds very serene and peaceful,
that's the idea.
It? Yes. And how did the piece progress then?
Well, it progresses to the next chapter in the composition, moves on to the Industrial Revolution, and the music then reflects the building of London, the bridges being built, the waterways being created, and lots of houses being built, and thousands of people coming from all over England to live in London in the mid-19th century. The third movement is actually about World Wars I and II, so 1914 and then 1936 to 39, I'm forgetting my history, and 1939 to 1945, the Second World War. And then the fourth movement reflects London as a cultural diverse melting pot as it is today.
Right. Let's move on to one of the things that you're best known for, composing the first symphony by a woman in Europe in 40 years. I mean, that's an incredible achievement. Why is it, though, that you think that you're the only one to have done it?
Well, I mean, when I was writing the symphony, I didn't think that I was the only one that was doing it. So it was, on reflection, I actually read it in a publication that I was the first person to have completed a symphony in 40 years now. I think it takes a lot of dedication, it takes a lot of opportunity. It's very hard to get the opportunity to work with a full symphony orchestra. I work with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, which, you know, is a well-established world orchestra, world-leading orchestra, and to get those kinds of opportunities is very difficult. But I was determined it's something I wanted to do, and I really pursued doing that.
Well, congratulations for doing so. And is there something particular about being a woman, though, that makes this harder, less accessible? I'm just conscious that, you know, men have done it, and you're the only woman.
True. Yes, I think the opportunities for women are much more limited. You need to be very confident in what you do and to feel that you can create a large-scale work like that. You have to have something to say, and I think because I have those ways about me, I'm a very determined person. I'm able, I'm confident in what I have to say as an artist, and I think that's why I've been able to push through with it.
Now, for someone who isn't a sort of classical music aficionado, just explain to us what a symphony is and, I mean, how complex it is, because it took you 18 months to compose, didn't it?
Which wasn't very long, yes.
And right, really. So, yeah, explain to me a bit about how complex it is and what exactly a symphony is.
Yes, well, looking back, I started with a completely blank sheet of paper, not knowing how to commemorate the Queen's 50th anniversary on the throne. I thought, this woman, she has seen everything. What can I do that's a bit different? And I like local history, and I was reading a book about local history. I'm from the borough of Newham, and I was reading a book about local history, and it was little sort of observations like the opening of the railways at the beginning of the 19th century and that sort of thing. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting just to map the journey of London from 1066, which the Norman Conquest, I thought that would be a nice sort of marking point, to the present day. But how would I do that in a 40-minute piece of work? So the symphony is a large-scale work for orchestra in 5 movements. So I decided to create the story of London in 5 chapters, which is what the symphonic form allows.
Right. I mean, we're so used, aren't we, to hearing, even those people who aren't so sort of knowledgeable about classical music, but we know the big names, we've all heard of the Beethovens and so on, and of course they are historic figures. Why is it, do you think, that perhaps people in the recent history, even in the last 100 years or so, haven't necessarily become these sort of worldwide known names for people who aren't, you know, very interested in classical music, as their forefathers have become?
I think that's a great question, and the one that I'm sure is intriguing publishers at the moment.
Right.
I think the idea is that composers will gain a name in the passage of time, but for me it's important to be known in your present day and to speak to people in the present moment. So I think I'm a populist composer in that I want everybody to engage in what I do, and I write the kind of music I think that people will be able to understand. Some contemporary music tends to be very abstract, and you need to have a certain language, musical language, to be able to understand it. But I would say the music I'm writing in a language which I consider to be quite global. You can hear a melody and you know that it speaks to you in some way.
Yeah, well, comparisons have been drawn between you and Vaughan Williams, who is one of the much better known modern composers, isn't
well,
it?
thank you very much. I'm honoured.
We actually heard some of that symphony earlier, didn't we? I actually thought that we were going to hear something from the TV drama you composed. We're now going to hear that now, so let's take a listen.
Okay.
So a very much more dramatic piece, I suppose. Yes. Explain to me what that was about and what the influence was for that piece.
Yes. Well, it's about being out in a storm in the middle of the countryside, and I was trying to create a lot of drama of what can happen when you're caught out in a storm, and I used very dramatic kinds of orchestration to create that effect.
One thing that I know you've also spoken out about is how classical music is sort of most closely associated with Europe, and I suppose touching on something that we spoke about before, you know, the likes of Beethoven and so on, they are all European composers, but you think that classical music should be taken away from being so sort of Eurocentric. Why is that? Do you think there's a sort of a world-class level of composers from around the world who are composing classical music?
Yes, I do, and I think that we forget that classical music derives from Africa as well, and from India, and from many other cultures. So, I mean, I see my own heritage in classical music, because I think that over the centuries, classical music has fed on all of these languages. It's just that we don't tend to associate the contribution from other parts of the world to classical music. And
you sort of take elements and inspiration from reggae and hip-hop and other kinds of music, don't you?
Absolutely, yes.
How's that received in what's perhaps quite a traditional sort of sphere of the arts?
Yeah. Well, I think it's always happened. I think Bach could have borrowed from some African griot in the 1600s or 1700s. So I think it's actually always happened. And I'm just continuing a tradition of classical music that has been going on for the last 1,000 years, in actual fact. You may wish to know that I've got some great performances coming up.
Well, I was going to ask, exactly, yes. What does the future hold for Shirley Thompson?
Yes. Well, this Thursday I'll be performing with Angela Caesar and Alison Devonish at St George's, Bloomsbury, and that's some of my songs that reflect on issues of migration and identity issues, and also the legacy of the transatlantic slavery tradition. After that, I have a production on at the Victoria and Albert Museum, where I'm looking at a character that I created for. Actually, it was again reflecting on the transatlantic slavery tradition. Right. The Dido Bell, okay. There's a film coming out later on in the year, but I actually created an opera about her in 2006.
Okay, so going back to those themes that we talked about before of slavery and so on.
That's right, and stories that aren't known.
Very good luck with it, Shirley Thompson.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.